Ring-a-ring-a roses, a pocket full of posies. Clara hummed the nursery rhyme quietly, though it felt out of place as she stepped into the gallery of the damned, where the air was thick with a silence broken only by hushed whispers. The aged wooden floors creaked beneath her steps, resonating with years of secrecy and silent screams. The dim lighting flickered, casting long shadows that danced menacingly on the walls, teasing Clara's imagination. She felt a shudder crawl up her spine, as if the gallery itself were alive, breathing down her neck. As an art lover, Clara's heart raced with excitement and her mind buzzed with curiosity. Yet there was something about this evening that made her innards twist in apprehension. It was as if each portrait and landscape held a whispering spirit waiting to be heard. She wandered between the paintings, her sensitive nature picking up on the charged atmosphere. Each canvas seemed to tell a wordless tale that clawed at the edges of her understanding, begging for attention. Then she saw it, a painting that ensnared her gaze and wouldn't let go. A portrait of a man whose eyes were oceans of torment, deep, dark, and endless. They followed her every movement with a hunger that felt personal, invasive. A cold chill kissed the back of her neck as she tried to look away, but found she couldn't. Whispers from the crowd of art enthusiasts reached her ears, tales of mishaps and misfortunes befalling those who dared too close a look at Lila's creations. Clara's heart skipped a beat. Could art be haunted? Could beauty mask a curse? She needed to know more. Drawn by an invisible thread, Clara ventured to seek out one of the mad locals affected by Lila's art, a recluse rumored to have lost his mind after acquiring one of her sinister strokes. The man's home loomed before her like an old tomb, its windows like hollowed eyes staring blankly into oblivion. Inside, shadows clung to corners like cobwebs, and despair tainted the air with mustiness. There he was, his form shriveled in an armchair, eyes darting frantically as if chasing unseen demons. His words were lost to sanity. Instead, his trembling hands offered Clara scribbled symbols on crumpled paper, echoes of the same sinister signs woven into Lila's paintings. A shiver tiptoed down Clara's spine as the man's haunted gaze met hers. Leaving the house felt like emerging from underwater. Clara gasped for breath in the open air. Yet even as she walked home under a moonless sky, she couldn't shake off the feeling of being stalked by something lurking just out of sight. Shadows flickered at the edge of her vision. There one moment, gone when she turned. Home should have been a sanctuary, but tonight it was anything but. The familiar walls seemed to close in on Clara. Every creak and groan sounded like whispers from hidden mouths. When sleep finally claimed her, it brought no peace, only nightmares where she was trapped within that haunting painting, its subject reaching out with hands that longed to drag her into its painted abyss. She woke drenched in sweat to find her room bathed in an otherworldly glow, moonbeams transforming ordinary objects into grotesque specters. Dawn couldn't come soon enough. Tormented by fear, yet driven by an insatiable need for answers, Clara began researching Lila's past exhibitions. Each article she devoured painted a grim picture, people driven to madness just like the man in the decrepit house. And then it struck, a pattern emerging from chaos. Each victim had become obsessed with a portrait that seemed to look back into them until they could no longer bear their own reflection. It culminated with a newspaper clipping, an article detailing yet another soul committed to an asylum after being consumed by one of Lila's cursed canvases. As Clara set the paper down, her hand trembled uncontrollably. The words blurred before her eyes as she realized she might have uncovered something far darker than mere artistry. With every tick of the clock and every flicker in her peripheral vision, one thought became increasingly clear. She was now part of Lila's gallery, a gallery not just adorned with paintings, but stitched together with whispered warnings and tormented souls seeking release from their painted prisons. And somewhere in that realization lay an open end, an abyss waiting for Clara's next step. Chapter 2, The Gallery's Gaze. Ring around the rosy, a pocket full of posies. Clara hummed the familiar tune absent-mindedly as she strolled down the cobbled street towards the gallery the next evening. The children's rhyme, once innocent in her ears, now carried a morbid weight. The last note lingered in the crisp air, an eerie soundtrack to her mounting dread. The gallery loomed ahead, its facade an imposing mix of sharp angles and dark windows. The evening light waned, causing Clara's shadow to stretch grotesquely on the pavement as if trying to escape her. She felt the echo of misplaced steps behind her, turning to find only her own elongated silhouette playing tricks on her mind. Inside, the gallery was a different beast at night. The daylight's retreat had given way to the artificial glow of spotlights that cast an otherworldly aura over Lila's artworks. Shadows clung to the corners like cobwebs, and the patrons' whispers seemed louder, almost invasive. Clara's gaze was irresistibly drawn back to the painting that had haunted her dreams, the man with the piercing eyes. She approached it as if in a trance, her heart pounding, each thud resonating through her body like a drumbeat foretelling doom. The eyes were even more compelling up close, a maelstrom of grays and blacks swirling within their depths. They seemed alive, sentient even, fixated on Clara with an intensity that begged for something she couldn't comprehend. She leaned closer, her breath fogging a tiny circle on the protective glass. Suddenly, a voice sliced through the murmur of the crowd. "Do you see him too?" Clara whirled around. A woman stood too close for comfort, her eyes wide with a knowing fear mirroring Clara's own. "He's in there," the woman continued, pointing a trembling finger toward the painting. "Trapped, just like we will be." Before Clara could respond, the woman vanished into the throng of bystanders, leaving a chill that ran deeper than bone. Shaken, Clara decided to leave before Lila could notice her unease. As she turned away from the painting, those eyes seemed to bore into her back, whispering silent pleas for liberation, or perhaps forewarning of an inescapable fate. Once outside, Clara wrapped her coat tightly around herself, as if it could ward off the night's chill or the growing sensation that she was being followed. Every flickering street lamp felt like a spotlight, alerting unseen watchers to her presence. The walk home was longer than she remembered. Every turn took her deeper into mist-shrouded streets that twisted like labyrinthine veins. The further she went, the more certain she became that something lurked just beyond sight, something sinister that hungered for her attention. At last, she reached her apartment building. Its familiar facade should have comforted her, but instead seemed to leer mockingly in the moonlight. Inside, her home felt alien, a space no longer solely hers. Shapes in the darkness seemed to shift when observed directly, furniture casting distorted shadows that played tricks on wary eyes. Even as sleep beckoned with false promises of respite, Clara knew rest would not come easily tonight. Her dreams were destined to be invaded once more by those haunting eyes, a silent sentinel watching and waiting within their painted prison. And so it was that Clara lay in bed, staring at the ceiling as a real nightmare unfolded. The eerie realization that she might already be a part of Lila's twisted gallery, another subject suspended in time beneath a watcher's gaze as unseen brushes stroked her fate with sinister strokes. The last thought before sleep claimed her was not one of comfort. What happens when those watched by painted eyes start watching back? In Clara's dreams that night, shadows danced behind closed eyelids, a macabre waltz from which there could be no awakening. While outside in the moonlit street below her room, something unseen whispered rhymes about roses and posies into the endless dark. Ring-a-ring-a roses, a pocket full of posies. Clara stood at the entrance of the gloomy, weather-beaten house, the last rays of the sun casting long shadows that seemed to reach out to her like skeletal fingers. The nursery rhyme hummed in her head, its innocent tune clashing with the sinister threshold before her. She hesitated, her heart pounding as though trying to escape the impending dread that filled her. The door creaked open with an agonizing groan, and Clara stepped inside, each footfall echoing in the haunting silence. The interior was cloaked in dust and despair, cobwebs draped like delicate shrouds over forgotten memories. She found him in what must have once been a living room, though now it was but a tomb of sanity. His eyes were wide with terror, darting to corners of the room where nothing seemed to be. Yet Clara felt it too, the unsettling notion that they were not alone. He didn't speak. His voice had long since abandoned him. Instead, his trembling hands offered up crumpled papers scrawled with symbols that mirrored those eerie strokes from Lila's cursed gallery. She tried to ask questions, her words slow and deliberate. but he only responded by frantically pointing at the symbols as if they were some cryptic answer, or perhaps a dire warning. Clara's skin crawled as an icy breeze swept through the room, though no windows were open. The journey home was a blur of paranoia. The streetlights flickered as she passed beneath them, casting dancing shadows that mocked her frazzled nerves. A whisper here, a rustle there, each little sound morphed into the footsteps of an unseen pursuer in Clara's mind. She clutched the man's papers to her chest like a talisman that could ward off whatever darkness had latched onto her. Her apartment was no sanctuary. It was tainted now. The familiar was foreign, every creak and groan a sinister threat. She poured herself a glass of water, its surface mirroring her pale, drawn face, a stark contrast to the dark circles etched beneath her eyes. Night draped itself across her world. Sleep was a reluctant visitor. When it came, it bore nightmares, the painting from Lila's gallery alive and shifting. Within it, she was trapped, unable to move or scream as the man with those haunting eyes reached towards her with a desperation that clawed at her very soul. She woke with a start, her breath ragged sobs in the oppressive silence of her bedroom. Moonlight slithered through half-closed curtains, casting ghastly shadows that twisted and writhed across the walls. Clara could only watch as they played out their silent pantomime, a wordless horror show just for her. The feverish need for answers propelled her into action once the sun dared to rise again. With trembling hands and bloodshot eyes, she scoured the internet for threads of understanding about Lila's twisted exhibitions. Patterns emerged, stories of minds unraveled and lives shattered by mere brushstrokes and unsettling gazes. Each tale wove into the next until Clara sat surrounded by a tapestry of terror, a puzzle that whispered of darkness beyond mere canvas and paint. Her search culminated in a chilling discovery, an article detailing another victim of Lila's artistry, who now whispered secrets to invisible listeners within asylum walls. The article ended abruptly, no reason given for the madness that consumed yet another soul, and Clara knew deep within her trembling heart that this was no coincidence. No mere twist of fate linking these tragedies. No, something far more sinister threaded through Lila's work, a curse that clung to every shadowed line and haunted every gaze. And now Clara felt its icy fingers tightening around her own mind, a cruel promise of unending nightmares yet to come. Ring around the rosy, pockets full of posies. Clara quickened her pace along the twilight-kissed streets, the haunting echo of her own footsteps, a constant reminder of the gnawing paranoia that had taken root within her. Her breath hung in the crisp air, each exhale a whisper of dread that seemed to fog her vision and muddle her mind. Shadows clung to the walls of the narrow alleyways like dark stains, twisting and contorting into grotesque shapes that seemed to writhe and pulse with malevolent intent. A shiver, sharp as a razor's edge, sliced down Clara's spine as she glanced over her shoulder. Nothing was there, at least nothing she could see, but the sensation of being watched, of being hunted, loomed as tangible as the cobblestones beneath her feet. She hurried on, clutching her coat tighter as if it could ward off more than the evening's chill. The familiar outline of her home loomed ahead, a sanctuary that promised safety and solitude. But as she approached the wrought iron gate, a sense of wrongness washed over her. It was subtle, like a painting slightly askew on a wall, easily dismissed, yet undeniably present. The door creaked open with an eerie groan, protesting against its own movement. The darkness inside felt alive, breathing and watching as Clara stepped across the threshold. Not even the warm glow of lamplight could dispel the creeping unease that enveloped the space like a shroud. In every corner of her once comforting living room, shadows pooled like ink in water. They seemed thicker now, almost viscous, and Clara couldn't shake off the feeling that they were reaching for her, stretching out with tendrils of darkness to brush against her skin with whispers of silk and sin. She took a deep breath and forced herself to move forward. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if she were wading through an invisible mire that clung desperately to her limbs. Suddenly, from upstairs came a noise, a soft thud followed by what could only be described as a slithering sound. It echoed through the silence, slicing it into ribbons of cold terror. Clara's heart pounded in her chest like a drumbeat in a funeral march. She knew she should leave, flee from this place that no longer felt like home. But curiosity, or perhaps some morbid death wish, rooted her to the spot. With shaky hands and eyes wide with fear, she reached for the banister and began to ascend the staircase. The steps moaned underfoot as if in protest, each one amplifying Clara's dread until it filled her entire being. At the top of the stairs, she hesitated before turning towards her bedroom door, which now stood ominously ajar. Inching closer, Clara's gaze fell upon a sight that brought bile rising in her throat. Her room bathed in an unnatural glow that seemed to originate from nowhere and everywhere at once. It cast bizarre shadows that danced upon the walls with macabre delight. And there in that lurid illumination stood something that ought not to be. A figure tall and thin as a wisp of smoke, its edges blurred and shifting like mist over a grave. It had no features to speak of, yet Clara felt its gaze upon her, a gaze filled with hunger and ancient knowing. Clara wanted to scream, to cry out against this impossibility, but fear had stolen her voice, leaving her mute in the face of unspeakable horror. The figure moved, or perhaps it was more accurate to say it drifted, towards her with an elegance that defied nature. Its approach was silent, but for the hissing whisper that seemed to emanate from its very essence, a sound like distant voices chanting an unknown litany. As it drew near, Clara's mind teetered on the precipice between reality and madness. She couldn't reconcile what stood before her with any logic or natural order. It was an aberration, an affront to all things living. With each slow step it took toward her, it became clearer. She wasn't merely staring into darkness. She was gazing into an abyss, and something within that abyss was staring back. Just as the figure reached out a tendril-like appendage towards Clara's trembling form, the world swirled around her, shadows melded into solid objects once again, the illusions shattered by a mind refusing to succumb entirely to fright-induced fantasy. A dream, a trick of light, or something far more sinister. Now alone, but for the haunting echo of what had transpired, or seemed to transpire, Clara sank to the floor amidst whispers and memories far too vivid for comfort. Her mind raced with unanswerable questions as darkness encroached upon every corner of thought. What was real? What was merely imagined? And perhaps most terrifyingly, what would come when night fell once more?
Thank you all for lending your ears and your imaginations to the chilling tale that unfolded before you tonight. As we close the book on the Gallery of Lost Souls, I hope the haunting echoes of Clara's journey through Lila's otherworldly art have left you delightfully unnerved. If you found yourself glancing over your shoulder, peering into shadows with a cautious eye, or questioning the very nature of art itself, then join us again for more tales designed to thrill and terrify. Remember to like this story, subscribe for more heart-pounding narratives, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a moment of fear. Until our next darkened path crosses, keep the lights dimmed and your curiosity kindled. Who knows what story might crawl out of the darkness next? Good night, dear listeners, and may your dreams be free of whispering galleries and painted eyes that follow.